Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Atlantic CIL podcast. I'm here with a good friend of mine, Paul Aronsohn, who's got the longest title I think I've ever seen in government, the New Jersey Ombudsman for Individuals with Intellectual Developmental Disabilities. And if you thought that wasn't long enough, then they add and their families. So thank you for being here. You just released your annual report. It looks like this is going to be your final report as in your position, which makes me sad. But, people do have to move on eventually. And it's a very thorough report. And I really want to talk about it with Paul because it's critically important to anybody in the disability world, anybody interested in this subject, anybody who understands that we really need disability supports and services because we're all going to end up disabled one day if we live long enough. So it's just such a critical report. So hi, Paul. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Donald. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and I wanted to start at the beginning about just let people know, what do you do? Because a lot of people, I don't think, understand, and I think you can relate to this. Sometimes people think we have more power than we do in the positions we have. People have to understand what it is. So can you explain it?
Absolutely. And it's funny because I remember when I was appointed back in April of 2018, my first question was, what's an ombudsman? And then it took me a couple months to be able to pronounce it properly.
Yeah.
But I think, the term ombudsman means different things in different capacities. We have in New Jersey on the state level, a handful, if not a few more ombudsman offices. We have a long-term care ombudsman. We have a corrections ombudsman for the correction system, special education ombudsman, so forth. But, our office, was created again about 7.5 years ago. And the idea was more than anything to be a resource for individuals with intellectual developmental disabilities and their families. And also to not only be a resource to help them navigate the very complex system of care that we have here in New Jersey, well-resourced but complex, but also to help them advocate. We spend a lot of time helping folks to advocate for themselves because we really believe that the voice of individuals and voice of families is the most important voice on these matters. And we want to do everything we can to sort of help that voice be heard.
Yeah, and you do a great job with that. And I think that in the report, that really shines through. I think you also lay out very good, clear, specific proposals that legislators and policymakers could adopt or consider adopting based on your experience, because I think that's important too. I know we're in a lot of the same rooms sometimes, and sometimes we hear a lot of the same story, and sometimes I just want to, not that it's like you want to get to, what are we going to do about it? You want to get to that point. Like, what can we do? And just so people don't feel helpless, there are things you can do to make group homes better, to make disability services work better. I mean, there are very smart people like Paul who spend a lot of time thinking about this. So I always tell advocates out there, that's why it's so important to be involved, because you need to push for these things. But I really want to start where you started in the report, which really captured how I feel about things, where in New Jersey, it's kind of a tale of two systems, you call it. You talk to some people and their needs are being met. Things are going great. And like I said, we're in a lot of those rooms where it's like, yay, and this is great, and everything's working out. And then there's this other side where people are really left behind in a lot of ways. So talk about that dynamic, because I feel that in a lot of ways too. And I feel like sometimes people that are doing well in the system often don't see the holes in the system because they just don't experience it, especially decision makers. So talk about that. Talk about that.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for that. And we've noted this in every one of our, so we've done 7 annual reports. Each one sort of noted it is a tale of two systems. Like you said, some people are being very well served by, the system of care here in New Jersey. We have a lot of good people in and out of government that are working, that have dedicated their lives, their professional lives at least, to helping people with disabilities. We have a lot of resources. We're a state that dedicates a lot of money towards it for children as well as adults. We have a lot of good programs, schools, provider agencies. We've got a lot of good. Of course, our Centers for Independent Living. But what we deal with primarily in this office are those folks that are falling through gaps in the system, those folks whose needs are not being met. We deal with a lot of, on a daily basis, issues concerning abuse and neglect in group homes, children as well as adults. We work with a lot of individuals and families who have either severe challenging behaviors or complex medical needs or some combination of the two whose needs are not being met. Again, children as well as adults. That's what we work with. And we not only try to help those folks in real time and try to connect them to their programs and services and or what have you, but we try to learn from them, those experiences, and share that learning with our colleagues in state government so we can improve the system, hopefully, so others won't fall through those same gaps.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think that one of the things Sills have in common with your office is we feel that same way. People come to us when they've really tried a lot of other things. I always say we we help people who are the underserved of the underserved that don't even know where to start or that have started somewhere and have gotten rejected from a lot of places. And one of the themes of your report is we do spend a lot of money in disability in New Jersey, but we don't really have that much of, or maybe I'm trying to phrase it in the right way. Maybe as it needs to be more transparent about how we're spending them. So really talk about that. I know there was a great expose, not a great in terms of what it was reporting, but great in terms of reporting, a great expose on NorthJersey.com about the challenges of group homes and the service gaps. And it's a really hard read, but people really should read it. I'll link to it in the episode about all the issues that group homes deal with. Talk about sort of kind of the lack of transparency, which actually, until you start doing this work, is quite surprising because you would think there would be more transparency in it, but there's not.
Absolutely, Donald. Yeah, so, and I do think that transparency is one of the biggest things we need to do going forward. We need to strengthen transparency throughout the system because we do. We're a state that believes in human services. We dedicate a lot of money to human services and disability in particular, but it doesn't always seem to get to the people that need it. And that's particularly true from what we see, both with respect to residential provider agencies, those folks that sort of have group homes, run group homes, state licensed group homes, both the children's system and the adult system, and the managed care organizations. There are 5 managed care organizations. So anyone who's on Medicaid would use. There's a lot of money going into these these
Yeah.
systems, these agencies. I'm sure some of them are doing really good work and spending it as they should, but some clearly are not. And there is just a lack of insight as to how the money's being spent and not being spent.
Right. And then when there's a lack of transparency, there's a lack of accountability because nobody quite knows where, like, who's on first, like, where's it all going? You go to the provider and they'll say, well, we don't have money for that. And then you sit there and you go, is that really accurate? And then, but it's hard to prove that because there's no transparency. So I think you're right about how, and that's to me an easier fix too. If we were committed
Yeah,
to like just let us see where the money goes.
yeah.
It's taxpayer money
Agencies,
at the end of the day.
yeah. Provider agencies, for instance, if they run group homes, should be, required to, make readily available how much money they're taking in, how much they're spending it on, how much they're spending on admin and maybe salaries, just some
Right.
high level indicators of where that money's going. But I just want to go back to a point you made, yes, not only is there a lack of accountability, which is critical, there's a lack of trust. And this system needs folks to trust it, particularly in the space that we work in with folks with intellectual developmental disabilities. Even if you're living in the community, you have your own apartment, you're living with family, friends, at some point you might need to be in a group home or a
Right.
state licensed apartment. We need to be able to give people that sense of trust, that confidence that the system is working and caring for them. And without that transparency, that trust won't be there.
Right, and I think we agree on this was the theme with policymakers and people in government, because I know sometimes they get frustrated, like we're all trying our best here, and they'll meet advocates and parents and people with disabilities, and they'll be like, well, they're so negative, and it's like, if you've had any time in these systems and been on the wrong side of them, you would get very negative and cynical too, and I think that one of the things that surprised me about the reading I've been doing with your report, and like I said on NorthJersey.com, their group home series, the lack of accountability for if there are death in a group home. I assume that like automatic, unbiased investigation, and talk about how sometimes there's not even an investigation, and that there's no mandate that it be an outside investigation, that the people doing the investigating are the people where the incident happened. So talk about that.
Yeah, it's a huge concern. Yes, most of investigations of allegations of abuse and neglect are done by the provider agencies themselves. Their reports are reviewed by the Department of Human Services, the State Department of Human Services, but they're done by the agencies themselves. And what we have seen is more often than not, they come back unsubstantiated. So you have the agency investigating themselves and coming back saying that no one's at fault. Again, and that might be true in many cases, but there's a lack of, there's a lack of trust that people have because of how these investigations are being done. But to your other point about deaths in group homes, we were shocked to find out about 2 years ago that the State Department of Human Services does not automatically investigate deaths in group homes, not even those that are what we would call unexpected deaths or questionable deaths. And we learned this in a very disturbing situation. And it was part of the USA Today network series that you referred to earlier. A young man died mysteriously in a group home. He was in otherwise perfect health before he died. The night he died, or the night before he died, wasn't clear exactly when he passed. There were 14 attempts to call 911 on his personal cell phone. The state didn't see that as a need to investigate. It took us 13 months of requests to finally get the state to do an investigation.
That is stunning. And like you said, there are a lot of group homes doing great work, and when they do investigations, they're really looking for an answer. But think about anything. I mean, you don't want, the person when something happens, you don't want the the same person doing the investigating who could potentially be negligent. I mean, that's a basic principle because we all
Yeah.
have certain biases. That's why it's important for it to be an objective person. Because if you have, a group home has an incentive for an investigation to turn out positive for them or unsubstantiated for them. Not saying that every time there's something that happens at a group home that it's the group home's fault. I'm just saying we're all human. That's a pretty known fact that you should have an objective investigation. And why don't we? Everybody get to the bottom of why don't we have a
I
objective?
mean, I've got some cynical theories about why, but let me just come back to that point a second. And I've talked to providers about this, and I said it's to your benefit to have somebody else do the
I
investigation
agree.
because you're not going to have any credibility. You come back, even if it really was unsubstantiated, it's just not going to have any credibility in
Correct.
people's minds. So we've often referenced, including in this report, to in New York, they have what they call the New York Justice Center for the Protection of People with Special Needs. And it's an independent agency that was set up in 2013, following sort of a similar expose in the New York Times about group homes in New York. And basically, it's an agency, and I think it really serves as a model, and not necessarily a perfect fit. And I mean,
Right.
I'm sure there's things that
Yeah.
about shortcomings they have, but it's an independent agency. They have 500 people working there. And obviously, New York's bigger than us, and it's not just folks with disabilities, it's other special needs populations, if you will. But all allegations of abuse and neglect for children as well as adults living in state licensed center go to the 24/7 call center that they have there. They review the allegations. They do themselves about 50% of the investigations. Those that they don't do, that let's say a provider might do, they review before it's final. They review and investigate all deaths that happen in state licensed settings. And very importantly, Donald, not only do they do these investigations to sort of hold people accountable, but they also try to use them as educational tools, right? They look
Right.
for patterns, they look for opportunities to
Right.
sort of teach direct care staff, better methods of providing care. It's to me, it provides such a good model for us to sort of replicate. And I hope we can get to that point because
Right, because
it's
if
so important.
horrible things happen, we should at least learn from them so they don't happen again. I mean, we should, of course,
Absolutely.
prevent them, but it's not good for the system. And I think that I won't put you on the spot. One of my cynical theories is that, people think it would be bad for the system and that you would lose group homes. This is kind of like the slippery slope argument that, you would lose providers and then nobody would be around to serve people. I just don't buy that. I think that accountability makes everybody better, and that the best will be fine, that the people doing the work will be fine, and that the people who are maybe struggling may have to close or get better, which is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. And I love your example of New York because it's not like a radical idea. You didn't just pull this out of Mars somewhere. This is something we could do.
But even on the resource question, because I often get this, well, we don't have the money for this, we don't have the money for that. First of all, we throw a lot of money in our system, and we can come back and talk about that more if you want. But I don't necessarily think it would cost more to do something even like this, because if you take the resources from the Department of Children and Families, Department of Human Services, and locate them in one set, you know what I mean? We could maybe, I mean, the money might already be there. We're just
Well,
not doing it the way we should.
and I always think that the way we talk about spending money often in politics is so short-sighted because how much money are we wasting not having accountability in the system,
So
having
true.
people die unnecessarily, having people go to instead of getting services at resources that can they can go to one main resource. Like how many instead of there being instead of needing to call me or you when stuff like this happens, if there was an office that they could go to that could handle it and have accountability, that would be so much better. So it's so short sighted, I think, to say we don't have the money when you, as you point
Abs-
out, a lot of money is being spent already and a lot of money is being wasted in terms of human lives, which is critical.
Right,
Like these are
right.
actual people living their lives. So I just think that's so important. Has there been any, because I read that expose and I read the report, do you think there's been any movement from leadership in government? How do you think they respond to this
I
stuff?
think so. I get this question every year when we put out our report. I can tell you, a couple things. I mean, and we have meetings with legislators and staff there, that are interested in doing something, with one or more pieces of like our report. I think the conversation has changed over the years. I mean, I've been doing this a little over 7 years, and interested in your thought about this. There seems to be a more of awareness. It seems to be incremental steps,
I agree.
not enough in my mind.
Yes, that's good.
As you know, we wrote this report, yeah, sort of as a message for the next administration because we have a gubernatorial election in November. And we wrote this report sort of as a primer for the next governor, the next ombudsman. These are the issues. This is what you need to address. And our hope is whoever the next administration will come in here, and sort of build on the work that this administration and legislature have done and sort of take it to that next level. And if I may, just to put a plug in for the one recommendation, I always, I'm sure we were going to get to this, but we need more folks with lived disability experience throughout government, not just in these disability,
Right.
offices and stuff. We're sort of the missing voice often, for a variety of reasons, but we can't be making disability related policy without people with disabilities and family members at the table driving that conversation. And that's what I'm hoping the next administration takes seriously and does.
Yeah, I think you're so right. We weren't going to talk about this, and I'm glad you brought it up. Disability related policy is all policy. So people with disabilities should be at every table. Any discussion about housing, tax policy, healthcare, education, it all has a disability component. And I always say to people that policy would look a lot different, I feel, if more people with disabilities of all different types of disabilities had a seat at the table. I think of our struggles with COVID as a country. And I think that if there were more people with disabilities in those early days about being there when those decisions were being made, I feel like policy would be different because when you have a disability of any kind, you are disproportionately impacted by these decisions. The lack of accountability at group homes, who does that fall on? The most vulnerable people with the most vulnerable disabilities. Paul and Donald are going to be, we're not in a group home, but the people who need somebody to investigate are people who are not in these rooms when policy decisions are being made. That is the disconnect. There are great people in legislative on both parties. There are people working hard every day, but it is a different perspective.
Yeah,
And
an example I used when talking to the North Jersey folks recently was a division on Veterans Affairs is most likely going to be led by a veteran or a veteran's family member. Division on Women's Issues is going to be led probably not by you or me, Donald, right?
yes,
So you would think, that offices specifically that are designed, to develop policy and implement policy for folks with disabilities would be led and largely staffed by people with lived disability experience. Not to suggest by any means that other people without that experience don't have a lot to contribute, but no one knows better than folks with that lived experience. It's just it's a fact.
Yeah, I think you're so right. I mean, not to go off too much of a tangent, but we've seen the effects of climate change really starting in the last couple of years. And the people that are going to be most disproportionately impacted by those are people with disabilities. So
Yeah.
it's just so important. And I think you really said that in your report, and I've read in your report several times about the importance of disability leadership. What other issues? I know you highlighted a bunch in your report, so you don't have to list them all. But if you could name like one or two besides group homes, if you were like, could wait, I always like to ask people if you had all the power in the world, what would you fix? And like,
Hard to
or at
say.
least get people to focus on for more than 10 seconds.
Yeah, we divide, the sort of discussion of observations and recommendations into two sets. One is the systemic, and I think the systemic are important. And at the beginning of the report, I talk about that. I think there's a need for more empathy. I think there's a need for more sense of urgency. I think there's a need for more information, access to information, more need for transparency and simplification, right? It's such a complex system. So there's some systemic issues that we need to address. And I think those would largely be addressed if we had more folks with lived disability experience in those positions. In terms of issue specifics, it's hard to say, which I mean, autism always comes to mind. Careful to point out, no disability is more important than another. No one should get more attention. But we've got 1 in 29 children in the state of New Jersey who have autism. We
Right,
have thousands, tens of thousands who have what they call profound autism and
right,
severe autism. And I can tell you, I grew up in a family with disability. I've been around disability professionally, personally, my whole life. It wasn't until I got to this job that I came to really start to understand severe autism. And these are children or adults that are self-injurious or physically aggressive to others or engage in property destruction or some combination. There's tens of thousands in our state, and we do not have the supports and services in place for children as well as adults. So that's definitely one. And as I've said, I really think because of the magnitude and because of just, yeah, I mean, just the scope of the challenge, I think the next governor really should sort of bring the community together, bring the experts in and out of
right.
government together, and try to look at this thing holistically.
Yeah, I think what you said, I was on a panel with, I mean, I had a meeting with people with severe autism, and it's important too. They often feel left behind as a part of the disability community as well. So,
Mm.
because which I, as a person with cerebral palsy, make sure I listen to, because to them, there are a lot of struggles that the disability community as a whole doesn't always see that they go through. So, I think it's really important that within our community we listen as well, and like you said, have that empathy. Because I think one of the things I always take from you is you spend a lot of time listening and less time telling people what they should do, which I think is so important, because you just have to be humble. Because the more I do this, the more I realize there's so much I don't know, and I've been doing this for 8 years. I think we kind of started around maybe the same time, sort of, but you just realize like there's so much experience out there that even if you have a disability or had a loved one with a disability, like it's just one experience among the many. And that doesn't invalidate one experience over the other. It just says you have to like be open.
Absolutely. Yeah, very well said. I completely agree. And another set of issues sort of are folks with medical complexities that require, private duty nursing or specialized transportation or some combination or can't access a day program because either they don't have a nurse or the day program won't hire a nurse or won't let them bring them, you know what I mean? It's a smaller subset, I guess, of the population, but it's one that really needs more attention and really is falling through the cracks. And I think that's why we have a lot of folks with medical complexities ending up in nursing homes at a relatively young age. And
Right.
I think that's just unacceptable. And I think there's more we can and should do about it. And I speak about that obviously in the report.
You're right, and as a nursing home should be the absolute last resort because there are a lot of issues with them and they're expensive as well. So it becomes a very hard to do. Like this is where people end up when they keep falling through the cracks. Maybe in places they shouldn't be if the system worked better. The other thing I really liked about what you said in the report, and it's a little thing that doesn't get enough attention, but we need more urgency from people in government and people doing this work, I get really frustrated when I call a place and nobody answers the phone. And I get it, we're all trying our best here, but the community we serve is very vulnerable. And I'm not saying that like we have to be available at all hours and all seconds of the night, but like you talk about this in the report about how you structured your office and how you're always out of your office, and I gotta give you a lot of credit. People like have your number and like you can call Paul and like he'll answer you, and he was appointed by the governor. And there's a lot of times where there's like a wall between people who do this work and do these services and the community they serve. And so that creates a lot of distrust in the system too, because the people in the community will be like, you're not here. You're not, like you say in the report, it's more than just going to an event and talking. Like people want to see you in the field. They want to see you doing it. They want to see you doing it. And it's so important. It's so
Right.
important.
And to your other point, we should do less talking and more listening. I remember I had an old professor years ago who said, I never met anybody who learned anything from talking. It's amazing what you can do. And so I think, yeah, we need to get out there. I think you're right about that wall. And I think, we've spoken about this in multiple reports. On the one hand, we don't have enough folks with lived disability experience. But to compound that problem is the fact that, in the children's system, we have care managers for case managers, and then we have support coordinators in the adult system. Too often it's hard. I mean, the people making decisions are not actually communicating with the individuals who are impacted by their decisions. And so they don't really know, like one of the things like our office is very similar to the Centers for Independent Living is that we're working one-on-one in a very personal way with the individual
Yes.
families we serve. We hear it, we get it, we see it, we hear it, I mean, we experience it with them. A lot of the folks making policy are walled off from that. And so they don't have that sense of urgency. They don't hear what you're hearing, Donald, and they don't hear what we're hearing.
Yeah, and when they do hear it, sometimes they're like, "Wow, this is shocking." But from people who've been out here, like to us, it's like this is like a Tuesday, and that's what I would tell people too. And it's not just about it's a nice thing to do, but if you want to create the systems change that we need. You need credibility too. And when people don't see their leaders and their decision makers as connected and knowing what's going on, it makes it hard for them to trust you to create the system that we need. And I think that's enough. Like that's why the lack of trust is so important. It's just we can't create the change if they need to see you out there, and you need that. It builds credibility with their community if you're at the events that are not just good quote unquote press events. Like if you're in the field doing the work, because then they trust you.
And you can't help but have a sense of urgency because you're experiencing, you're seeing it and hearing it.
Well, it's just like, it's frustrating when you're in these rooms and it's like, well, we'll figure it out next time. It's like, how
Yeah,
many times can we be in this? Can we figure it out now? Like, what are we waiting for? Like,
right.
Paul's did the report. Now we should focus on implementing it. Let's talk about your office because it started off with just you
Yeah.
figuring out what an ombudsman was. I remember when you first started, and now it's really grown. And really talk about because that's really important too, because people need to understand kind of the work that goes into it, and if they're starting something small, how it can grow into something, and how to really build something that people with disabilities can use. Because I remember your first year, you were just figuring it out. Now you got an office of what, 4 people,
There's
and
5 of us. There's 5 of us
wow,
total and an intern. Yeah.
and so talk about that.
Yeah, so yeah, this was brand new, and I sort of talk about this at the beginning of the report. It was the legislation was signed into law, created this office in January 2018. I was appointed in April of 2018, and there was no plan, there was no office, there were no pens, there was so we sort of made it up as we go. And on the one hand, that's both a challenge and an opportunity, right? Because it didn't exist, and so you got to sort of piece this thing together. But it sort of grew organically as people were coming to me. I was trying to make it a point of being anywhere and everywhere, meeting people and talking and listening. And it became clear right from the get-go that we are going to take a personal approach because that's often the missing element, if you will, giving families and individuals access to, a senior government official on the phone, not then it was no video, but in person, in their homes, wherever they want to meet for coffee, really trying to keep it personal. But so I did that for 2 years, and then we brought on Christine Baxter, who's now the deputy director. And then it was, right before COVID shut us down. And then it was just me and Christine for the next couple of years. And now since then, we've hired 3 more people. We had somebody work part-time for us and an intern. We definitely need more. And in fact, in the report, in the postscript, give some recommendations as to what I think how this office should be sort of fixed, if you will, or improved, strengthened.
Yeah, talk about that. Talk because that's really important. Like again, if Paul had the magic wand, what would he turn his office into?
Yeah. So one thing, going back to something you said at the beginning, like a lot of times people expect us to sort of, overturn policies or overturn decisions, and we don't have that authority. We have absolutely no authority in this office, but we have a lot of
The struggle
passion.
is real. I know that feeling. I know that.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of energy, but what we put in the report for just some, I think some common sense sort of improvements to this office. One is, I think we need to increase its size. We just don't have 5 people covering the whole state, children as well as adults. And yeah, our focus is for intellectual and developmental disabilities, but we try to help anybody who comes to
Yeah.
us, which goes to actually one of the recommendations is I really think that it's time for the next administration to sort of expand the scope of this office to make it an ombudsman for people with disabilities, including folks with mental health disabilities, including people with physical disabilities, late onset disabilities. Again, we can't be everything to everybody, but a lot of parts of the disability community don't have somebody like us that can help sort of open a door, connect them, point them in the right direction, and help them advocate. And so I really would like this office to be expanded to cover everybody with disabilities.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And I think that doesn't mean that issues can be focused on because there are needs in the disability community that are distinct from other needs in the disability community, like you were talking about severe autism. But there are a ton of needs that are overlap with everybody.
Sure.
And the siloing of people with disabilities is very detrimental to how policy gets made because oftentimes you'll be sitting with a decision maker and they'll say, well, we are funding X group, but they're leaving behind Y group. And they'll say to you, but we've done our disability work, which is,
Right.
which
I
is
hear that. Yes.
frustrating.
Yeah. But I really think, yeah, I think it would be a good thing for the whole community. And I think for the next administration to have someone, again, we're not talking about creating new programs, new funding streams. We're just saying somebody who can help sort of direct people, answer questions, point them in the right direction, and help them again advocate, which I think is so important, help them make sure that their voice is being heard.
One of my themes is advocacy and effective advocacy, and you're very good at it. So what, because a lot of people come to me and they'll say, like, how do I want to advocate, but how do I do it in an effective way? So I just want to know if as we're closing out here, what tips would you what are some of your things you do to be effective when you don't have like I don't want to say you don't have power as a person because we don't have the ability to influence and we shouldn't give up power, but when you don't have like direct power, like you can't go into the group home and be like, I'm launching an investigation tomorrow. Like you can't or overturning a insurance decision about, how many hours an aide should get. Like you can't do that stuff. What would you tell people how to like get an audience with people and influence decisions in an effective way?
Good question. I think, first of all, people have to realize their voice matters. I think too often people feel diminished. They don't have agency that and because you're dependent on the system that you can't rock the boat too much. And it's a precarious position to be in, but your voice matters. And I would say it can be a complex system. It can be hard to navigate and know how to get through a certain door. But no, you can and should get through that door. And legislative, elected officials do want to hear from you, local, state, federal. We not only in our office connect people to their legislators and to policymakers, we connect them to reporters, journalists. If they want to tell their story, we think it's very important that, again, that they have the platform, if you will, to sort of tell their story. Advocacy, it can be difficult. It can be because we're talking a lot of folks that sort of rely on the system, and so you don't want to rock the boat too much. But people's voices should be heard. I will tell you though, I've thought about this as somebody who's had a foot in government and coming from a family with disability, what's going on with our advocacy? Like, well, you know, why can't we sustain it? It seems like our
Yes.
population has trouble sustaining it. And granted, we have some challenges. Sometimes they're physical challenges, sometimes there are other challenges. We work with a lot of parents who just don't have the bandwidth at the end of the
Yeah.
day because they're caring for their loved one. They might be able to write a letter here or send an email here. They just can't keep it up. And I remember, Donald, when I was mayor years ago in my town, Burke County, we wanted to make our town pool, which was like a man-made lake in the middle of town, wanted to make it accessible. Seems like a reasonable thing to do. We got some grant,
Radical.
yeah, we got some grant money, and we, wanted to put a ramp in, you know what I mean? So, and sort of universal design. It would benefit everybody, you know what I mean, who wanted to use it. And we kept getting pushback from some folks. It took us 3 years to finally sort of get this thing done.
What was I
But
gotta know? What's the anti-poll argument? What was the
oh, I mean, you'd hear terrible things like, why can't they go swim at the YMCA?
oh my
You
God.
know, and then, I mean, and then, the pool, it's historical grounds and, what I mean? And you don't want to, that's going to ruin it, even though we had chain link fence in the middle,
Right,
what I
right.
mean? It was just terrible. I mean, bad arguments. Then it was like, okay, forget about a ramp. Why don't you just get this floating device? I'm like, well, not everybody just wants to float, right?
Yes, yes.
And then it was like a lift, that was like the compromise. Okay, how about a lift? I go, well, not everybody wants to sort of have to be lifted. It just, why don't we get a ramp?
Why don't we make a pool that everybody can go into? Why don't we go
Yeah,
there?
it serves everybody, with a ramp. But I would sometimes get pushback on this, and it's an important point. It goes to your question. People used to say to me, Paul, why are you making such a big to do about this? No one comes to the council meetings and
Yes,
asks for it. And I said,
bingo.
you don't understand families with disability. They don't have the luxury of going to meetings at 7:30 at night, advocating. But doesn't mean they don't need it, doesn't mean they don't deserve it. You know what I mean? We're supposed to represent everybody, whether they come to a council meeting or not. But it speaks to advocacy on the part of the disability community. We don't always have the means, the bandwidth
Correct.
to advocate. Like, so we need to find a way to make our voice heard, whether it's electronically through emails and these online petitions, but we need to make our voice heard.
Yeah, and I'm really gonna, this is a great theme to end on because we totally agree on this. And I wanted you to say those arguments. I had a feeling what they were because I want people to understand like the arguments that are out there are made by people who don't have that experience and don't think about it. So that's why you get these, it's called NIMBYism in a lot of ways. Not in my backyard. Like I'll put them somewhere else in the pool or
Right.
let's do and which is why it's important if you have any type of disability and any type of loved one with a disability or just interested in these issues, why please try to go to those town hall meetings. Please try to advocate for virtual access to those town hall meetings because you get two people in the room going, wait a minute, like I would like to use the pool. It changes the whole dynamic. Like decisions are, and it's not, I just want to say this. It's not, I get it. It's totally not fair. Why do we have to advocate to be in a pool? Like, but you can't get stuck on that because otherwise, you're not going to get it done. You have to be in these rooms when decisions are made. And yes, the rooms are hard to get into sometimes, although not impossible. And yes, it's not fair that they're not virtually accessible. Like all those things, I'm totally with my disability community people too. But if you get in there and just stand there and be like, I would like a universally designed pool, it changes all of a sudden that those decision makers are like, wait, like, oh, you're here? Like, oh, this is now important to me. So that's like find a way to show up in whatever capacity that is.
And to take that point to the next level, people should sort of emulate what you're doing. We need more people running for office.
I
We
love
need
it.
more people, local school boards, councils, mayors, state legislators. We need to, if we can, we need to run for these offices and we need to be driving that conversation.
Yes, that's so key. And I did run for office. First time didn't work out. There's always next time if there is a next time. But I just want to say this too. A lot of people in the disability community will tell me, yeah, I don't belong in those rooms. I don't, those people are super smart. I don't know policy. And like, just Paul and I have been in those rooms. You'll do just fine. Like, you'll do just fine. Like, there are smart people there, but you're smart too. My point is to tell that person with a disability, you belong there too. There's no reason why you can't
So,
run for office either. There's no reason why you can't attend the town council meeting either. There's no reason why you can't work at a CIL or find something you're passionate about. Don't let decisions be dominated by people that don't have your interest or just don't even understand it. Those people saying the ridiculous thing about the pool, a lot of them sincerely believe they were making a perfectly logical argument about why people with disabilities can't just float forever. Why can't they just float? So that's what I would tell you too, as somebody who's run for office, and I get intimidated too. But you get in these rooms and you realize, like, not only do you belong there, but they really need you there because you have experiences that they don't. They don't understand. You bring up certain things that they don't, and that's where we'll end it, Paul. I know is this your last year? Is that's what I'll end it. I'll put you on the spot. Is this it says in the report that it's the end, but are you pretty sure it's the end?
yes, I
Okay.
am. So I'm appointed by the governor. I serve at the
Okay.
pleasure of the governor, and we'll have a new governor come January. But even if, and I get a nice question every once in a while, well, what if they ask you to stay on? Which is a wonderful question. The answer is no, for two reasons. One is I do think this organization, like a lot of organizations, would benefit from new ideas, new energy, just new perspectives. And second, I'm emotionally drained. I just
Yes.
it's hard. I mean, as I write in the report, all of us in this office, we get so emotionally invested in the people we serve. I mean, we cry with them. We feel it we all the time. And I think for everyone's sake, I need to step back a little bit. So, but thank you for the question.
Yeah. I understand that. I think that's a perfectly reasonable answer. I do think part of leadership is knowing when it's time to kind of move on, because new leaders do need to come aboard, and in order for the office to evolve, you need new perspectives. It can't just be, Paul forever. like, so that's really important. But I just want to say you've done awesome work, and I really emulate a lot of the things you do in these rooms, and you've just been a great advocate and keep the fight alive. And that's what I would tell people too. I know federally and a lot of things are going on where it's really scary out there, but we can still get a lot of good things done.
Sure.
So Centers for Independent Living got their funding back after being kicked out of the state budget. And that took a lot of advocacy. And also, when we first got kicked out, we thought we were never going to get put back in. And I only tell that story to say it can be bad and then it cannot be bad. So you can't surrender to the darkness or to the cynicism, and you gotta cry, you gotta get it out, but then you gotta get back in the fight. Thank you, Paul, so much for joining us, and thank you all for listening.
Great. Thank you, Tom.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.